Halloween is a somewhat mysterious holiday that, on its surface, may not seem obviously connected with any particular religious tradition. But what if I told you its roots have twisted in and out of some of the most ancient religious practices in history, so far back that its true origin may never be found? Halloween is one of the oldest, widely celebrated holidays in the world, having been popularized in the West and adopted by cultures on every continent. The names and practices can vary widely from culture to culture, but almost all of it can be traced back so far that it predates most written history. It's not clear if there was one single source for these traditions, or if they were naturally conceptualized by every major culture, simply as a product of the human experience and desire to connect with our ancestors. But no matter where it is celebrated, every Halloween-like tradition throughout history has had the same underlying theme: remembering the deceased. So what do we concretely know about the origins of this ubiquitous holiday? The primarily Western version can be easily tracked back through the pagan Celtic celebration of Samhain to an ancient Greek holiday known as Anthestaria. Anthestaria was originally concerned with underworld spirits, specifically those known as Quinns. Anthestaria was a holiday dedicated to placating the local Quinns and cleansing the town of any negative energy they might bring. It took place over the course of 3 days, with each day being dedicated to a different step in the process. On the first day, burial urns would be opened to set the Quinns free from the underworld. On the second day, offerings of cooked grains and seeds were made to the god Hermes, who, being the emissary to the afterlife, could enchant and control the Quinns with his wand, the caduceus. They would then purge their bodies by chewing buckthorn, smear pitch on their doorposts, and attach more buckthorn to their doors. Finally, on the third day, the Quinns were summarily dismissed by chanting, "Begone, you Quinns, the Anthestaria is over." Thus, their homes would be cleansed from the taint of death and misfortune for the following year. The ancient Romans had a similar festival for protecting their households from the spirits of the dead, known as Lemuria, which is named after the shades of the restless dead. Like Anthestaria, it was celebrated over the course of 3 days, though not consecutively. The even days were skipped, as the Romans considered them unlucky. Lemuria was famously described in, and perhaps even invented by, the Roman poet Ovid in his work Fasti. Lemuria originally had both public and private rituals, but over time the public ones were eventually lost to history. The private rituals, however, were detailed by Ovid. In the middle of the night, the head of the household would get out of bed barefoot and throw black beans over his shoulder 9 times without looking back. Each time he would say, "These I send, with these beans I redeem me and mine." The spirits of the dead would be appeased by the offerings, and politely refrain from taking a living member of the family out of envy. The man would then, still without looking back, touch water and clatter bronze implements together while reciting 9 times, "Ghosts of my fathers, be gone." Only then would the house be free of misfortune related to these spirits. Early in the 7th century, when the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant faith in Europe, the more commonly known All Saints' Day was established. The date was set to be the day following Lemuria, to more easily relate it to the pagan pantheon and help ease conversion from paganism to Christianity. The date was later changed to November 1st, possibly to help Christianize the celebration of Samhain that marked the first day of winter in the Celtic tradition. The Christian tradition eventually developed into a multi-day event as well, consisting of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, collectively known as All Hallows Eve. All Saints' Day is dedicated, unsurprisingly, to all of the saints of the Church. On this day, practitioners direct prayers to the saints to have them help the souls of the deceased make the journey from purgatory to heaven. On the following All Souls' Day, the souls of the deceased, primarily friends and relatives, are honored and remembered. Since the fate of the souls were in the hands of the saints, much more focus was placed on All Saints' Day, including a vigil and fast that would last into the night, which became known as All Saints' Eve, or All Hallows Eve. The subject of Halloween's relation to Samhain is a little murky. Some large flaws in older research have been exposed by modern scholars, and it is now unclear how much of its recorded history is drawn from similar misinterpretations. The biggest problem came from older studies that attributed Samhain's connection to the afterlife being the source of most modern Halloween practices. Indeed, modern practices are derived from more modern Samhain rituals, such as dressing up to ward off the spirits of the dead, but the current authorities on the subject have stated that Samhain wasn't originally related to these beliefs at all, and that they were picked up from Christian beliefs about the season after the two religions began to intermingle. The current interpretation of Samhain's connection to Halloween is that it was the time of year when cattle were brought home from the fields, the war season was over, and families and tribes were reunited. These times were met with great feasting and celebration, and was when the year's adventures and stories were told, including those of myth and legend. Over time, these tales of legend and war and death became synonymous with the celebrations and harvest, and the blending with Christian practices for All Hallows Eve produced what we now think of as Halloween. Virtually every culture has a tradition for honoring the dead that goes back as far as history can see. In many Asian countries, a common celebration is the Hungry Ghost Festival, which usually comes from Buddhist or Taoist tradition. While exact practices and beliefs vary from place to place, it is focused on honoring the souls of the dead. Like Halloween, the particular day is thought to be when the veil between the spiritual world and the real world is at its thinnest, and souls can easily pass from one to the other. Other surrounding countries have very similar celebrations, though the roots and traditions come from other sources. In the Philippines, 3 days in the fall are dedicated to remembering and honoring the dead, during which many Filipinos travel back to their hometowns to celebrate with family. An older and somewhat fading tradition involves groups of children going door to door, singing carols about the souls in purgatory in exchange for food and money. Last but not least, celebrated primarily in Mexico, is the Day of the Dead, or Dia de Muertos. Day of the Dead is another ancient tradition that goes back at least to pre-Columbian civilization, possibly as long as 3,000 years ago. Another 3-day-long celebration, practitioners visit graves and build private altars, bringing offerings of food and drink for the deceased. The traditions can vary even from one town to another, but the core goal is the same: attracting the deceased back from the afterlife to hear the prayers and thoughts of the living. Despite having its roots in religion, this particular holiday shares another similarity with Halloween, in that it is widely practiced even by those who are otherwise not religious. This is due in large part to the holiday's strong connection with Mexico's history, as it is seen as a very important and iconic part of their heritage. So what do you think? Do you know of any other Halloween-like traditions we didn't cover here? Did anything about the winding and complex history of the holiday surprise you? Let us know in the comments below. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for watching. I'm Metasomma for AspectHistory, and we'll see you in the next video. Toodles!